I am 32 years old, and I was married to my high school sweetheart, Jessica, for nearly a decade before I found out she had been unfaithful for years, with multiple men. Hey everyone, I am pretty new to this whole Reddit thing, but my current wife, hey sweetheart, is a longtime user and introduced me to it. After reading so many stories here, I figured I would share my own. In part, I just need to get it all off my chest and make sense of everything. But I also hope that my experience might help someone who is stuck in a bad situation with a cheating spouse. If you are on the fence about whether to stay or leave, maybe this will be the push you need to take back your life and get what you truly deserve. I grew up on a 26-acre horse farm out in rural Ohio. It was quiet, isolated, and the kind of place where you could go for miles without seeing another person. As a kid, I kept to myself and spent more time buried in books than talking to people. I had a handful of close friends, but when it came to relationships, I barely put in any effort. If you even count the little girlfriends I had in middle school, that was the extent of my dating life back then. My parents split up when I was young, and I lived with my mom, only seeing my dad every other weekend. That arrangement had a bigger impact on me than I realized at the time. I never really got to see what a healthy relationship looked like, and I did not have enough time with my dad to learn how to be a man from him. Mom had a string of boyfriends, and unfortunately, some of them were abusive, especially toward my brother and me. I still remember being 10 years old when one of them smacked me so hard that I flew across the room. If anything in the house was out of place, we could expect to get whipped with a belt. Another one had a downright cruel streak. He used glue traps to catch mice in the garage, and then made us stand there and watch as he cut off their legs, throwing the poor things in the trash while they were still alive. Real stand-up guy. I learned pretty quickly that the best way to get by was to keep quiet, stay out of the way, and be agreeable. If I smiled and acted pleasant, I could avoid most of the trouble. But over time, that turned into a bad habit, one where I just put up with whatever people did to me instead of standing up for myself. Books became my escape. I was always reading, and by the time I was a teenager, I had more than 1,000 books crammed onto 5 double-stacked bookshelves in my bedroom. In the winter, once my chores were finished, I would retreat to my room and get lost in a story. When the weather was nice, I would take a book outside and find a quiet spot in the woods, out in the hayfields, or even at the old cemetery on the edge of our property. It was peaceful, but looking back, I probably spent way too much time alone. I know that is a lot of background, but through therapy, I have come to understand how my childhood made me more likely to stay in an unhealthy relationship. The way I grew up taught me to tolerate things I should never have accepted. Jessica and I met when we were teenagers at a church lock-in, an event neither of us even wanted to attend. She had that classic mid-2000s quirky personality, the kind of girl who wrote odd poetry, randomly shouted nonsense like "spork," and thought she was way too different for the mainstream. She had a head full of curly hair, a lot of confidence, and a sharp wit. She walked right up to me, challenged me to an air hockey game, and from that moment on, I was hooked. And that was the start of a story I wish I had seen coming. We were together exclusively for the next 7 years. We finished high school side by side, went off to the same college, and even landed the same scholarship to a local state university. Like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but I chalked it up to being part of a normal relationship. That is just how it was supposed to be, right? Jessica had always been unpredictable. One minute she was sweet and loving, and the next, she was doing everything she could to push me away from my friends. She claimed they were jealous of the time she and I spent together, and that they did not really want the best for me. She was overly emotional, breaking down in tears over the smallest things, and when she was really upset, she would lash out physically, hitting me when she was mad, even if I had nothing to do with whatever had set her off. She constantly needed reassurance, not just from me, but from anyone around her, and she had no shame in seeking that validation however she could. I put up with all of this because she was my first serious girlfriend. Whenever I tried to call out her bad behavior, she had a way of twisting things around until I felt like I was the one who did not understand. She would downplay it, make it seem like I was just not smart enough to get what was really going on. I figured she was just being irrational, but I told myself it was worth dealing with to keep things stable between us. But once we got to college, the warning signs became impossible to ignore. Within the first few months, she was constantly hanging around with other guys in our dorm. We lived in an honors dorm, where the male and female suites were in the same building but separated. I would ask her if everything was okay between us, and she would reassure me that it was. But then, that same night, I would walk in and see her sitting on some guy's lap in his room. More than once, I caught her kissing random guys, acting way too familiar with them, or just behaving in ways that did not seem appropriate for someone in a committed relationship. When I finally confronted her and told her I was done unless she told me the truth, she admitted that she had been messing around. She confessed to performing oral sex on one guy in particular, and she gave me every disgusting detail. Her reasoning? She had become obsessed with him because, and I swear this is what she said, he looks like the guy from Napoleon Dynamite and is just really attractive. That statement alone should have been my wake-up call, the moment I walked away and never looked back. But at that point, we had already been together for nearly 5 years. I convinced myself we could work through it. I confronted the guy, Jessica cut off contact, and for a little while, things seemed to improve. By my junior year of college, I had landed a steady job with a local construction company. In just 6 months, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a house. This was in 2008, and since we lived in an old steel town, the housing market was in terrible shape, meaning I could afford a place of our own. I sat down with Jessica, and we decided it made sense to buy a house near our school and start our life together while finishing college. Not long after moving in, we got engaged. I thought that pulling her out of the dorms and away from that environment would stop her from cheating. And for a time, it actually seemed to work. Everything appeared to be falling into place. For the next few years, things were good, at least, that was how I saw it at the time. Jessica found work selling books and then decided she wanted to go to graduate school. In fact, she attempted 4 different graduate programs, but dropped out of each one because she realized it was not what she wanted to do. Whenever she could not secure scholarships or loans, I paid the tuition and supported her choices, figuring she was just trying to find her path. We got a dog, picked up a couple of cats, and settled into what felt like a stable life. I stayed with that same construction job, even though I could not stand my boss. The pay was decent though, and it kept us afloat. In 2010, when we were both 23, we got married. Looking back, I would tell anyone, do not get married that young. You have no idea what a real, healthy relationship is supposed to look like at that age. At the time, though, I thought I had it all figured out. My routine was simple: wake up early, kiss my wife goodbye, and head to work. My job had me doing a little bit of everything, drafting job takeoffs, and sometimes even heading to the job site to help with labor. It was a small business, so everyone wore multiple hats. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but I still took care of whatever needed to be done. I would let the dog out, listen to Jessica talk about her day, and try to be supportive. If I ever vented about my own frustrations, she would tell me I was being weak and making her stress worse. So, I just stopped complaining. Instead, I would cook dinner, mow the lawn, or do whatever else needed doing. Then the cycle would repeat the next day. I convinced myself that this was what a normal life looked like, maybe even better than what most people had. But things started unraveling, though I did not realize it at the time. The turning point was when Jessica landed a job with a local energy company doing mapping. For the first time, she was making more than minimum wage. At first, I was happy for her, proud, even. But after only a few months, someone higher up in the company took a particular interest in her. And that was when everything started going downhill. It was not even 4 months before Jessica suddenly announced she had a new job as a process assistant in a major city a couple of hours away. I was not too clear on the specifics, but somewhere around that time, she started an emotional affair with her new boss, one that eventually turned physical. Even now, I still do not know what to make of it. The guy was 30 years older than her, fresh off a separation from his wife, and to top it all off, he was literally living in his mother's basement. I noticed she had been pulling away from me more than usual, but I figured it had to do with the stress of a demanding corporate job and the long commute. Wanting to be supportive, I started putting in extra effort, surprising her with small gifts, planning thoughtful gestures, but nothing seemed to make a difference. She was distant, uninterested. Still, I convinced myself it was just a rough patch, that once she got used to the job, things would go back to normal. In January 2013, we decided to move to Cleveland so she could be closer to work. It seemed like the right thing to do. I ended up finding a much better job. We managed to get a great place for a steal, and for a while, everything felt like it was falling back into place. Jessica had gotten a raise for what they called outstanding performance, and she was starting to make new friends at work, finally coming out of her shell a bit. But that newfound confidence also came with a whole lot of late nights out with her coworkers. At first, I told myself it was good for her. She was socializing, having fun. But soon, she was staying out later and later, coming home completely hammered on a regular basis. It led to more arguments than I can count, but eventually, we just fell into a new routine, one where we barely spoke to each other, and when we did, it was just polite, surface-level conversations that never went anywhere. By the end of 2014, things were in a rough place. But in December, we took a trip to visit her parents in Texas, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like we had reconnected. It was a great trip, one that made me realize just how far we had drifted. When we got home, I had what felt like a real moment of clarity. I sat down with Jessica and told her how much I had enjoyed our time together, how I wanted to carry that feeling forward and work on making our relationship stronger. I genuinely believed we could turn things around if we both put in the effort. I expected maybe a conversation, maybe even a little hesitation. What I did not expect was for her to completely lose it. Her eyes went wide with panic, her face drained of all color, and she let out this stuttered, high-pitched scream before bolting down to the basement. I was stunned. I followed her, trying to understand what had just happened, what I had said that could possibly make her react that way. But instead of explaining, she turned on me, accusing me of quartering her down there. I backed off, confused, and then she just broke down sobbing, telling me through tears that she did not deserve love. I tried to get her to talk, to tell me what was going on, but she shut down completely. Eventually, we went to separate rooms to cool off. The next day, I brought it up again, thinking we could talk through it now that things had settled. But Jessica shut me down immediately. She flat out denied that any of it had happened. According to her, we had not even seen each other the night before. And then she hit me with the ultimatum. If I ever brought it up again, she would leave. Obviously, after that, my gut told me something was off, but cheating was not the first thing that came to mind. I just assumed she was struggling with some deep insecurity, something she did not know how to deal with. She had always been an insecure person, but this was on another level. After that episode, I made the choice, whether it was a smart one or not, to just settle. My teenage self had always believed that if I had a partner who occasionally made me laugh and sometimes shared a bed with me, that was about as good as a relationship could get. I had seen firsthand how my mother's life had unraveled after her divorce, and I had developed a strong resistance to the idea of ending a marriage. So I decided I would just make this work however I could. Jessica kept going out. She kept drinking too much. The random emotional outbursts continued. And me? I decided to just keep my thoughts to myself. If she never asked how I was feeling, then I simply would not bring it up. While all of this was going on, I decided to focus on improving myself. If nothing else, I wanted to be a more well-rounded, interesting person. I started putting together a home gym, got serious about working out, and picked up a few hobbies I had always been interested in but never made time for: backpacking, woodworking, and even some wood turning. Around this time, Jessica had been complaining that I had no real hobbies and that I was not exciting enough for her. So, instead of actually addressing the real issues in our relationship, I took her words at face value and figured that working on myself might somehow fix things. In hindsight, though, this was one of the best things that came out of that relationship. To this day, I am in the best shape of my life, and my woodworking skills have turned into something genuinely useful. So, if nothing else, at least I walked away with that. Then came the night that changed everything. April 2015. That was the day I finally saw the truth, clear as day. Jessica stumbled into the house after one of her usual nights out with friends, completely wasted. To this day, I have no idea how she managed to get home in one piece. She'd barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, and I sat there holding her hair as she got sick over and over again. Eventually, she passed out right there on the bathroom floor, barely able to breathe normally. There was a moment when I genuinely thought about calling an ambulance because her breathing was so erratic, but in the end, I decided to wait it out. Her phone was lying on the floor beside her, buzzing nonstop with incoming texts. At first, I ignored it, figuring it was just one of her friends checking in to make sure she got home safe. But after a while, I thought I should at least let them know she made it back. So, I picked up her phone, used her thumb to unlock it, and opened the messages. What I saw made my stomach drop. Every single message was from her boss. And the last one? It read something like, "You only left because you were mad I made you stop. We cannot keep doing this in the office anymore. F is going to catch us." At that moment, everything clicked into place. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for not seeing it sooner. Looking back on the last 2 or 3 years, it was so obvious, and yet I had never allowed myself to put the pieces together. Even now, I still feel stupid for being so naive, but I was young. I had assumed we had just drifted apart in the way that long-term couples sometimes do. It never even crossed my mind that she might be cheating because, despite everything, I had never considered doing that to her. I assumed she felt the same way, but I was dead wrong. I started scrolling through all their messages, and it became clear that this had been going on for a long time. I could not pinpoint exactly when their working relationship had turned into an emotional affair or when it had escalated into something physical. But there was one message from earlier that night, right in between pictures she had sent him of herself at the bar, where they were talking about their next meetup. It was set for just a few days later. At that point, I knew that if I confronted her right away, she would just twist it around on me. She would say I was snooping, that I had misunderstood, that I was remembering things wrong, something she had convinced me I did often, which, looking back, was just her way of gaslighting me to cover her own tracks. So instead of saying anything, I made a plan. The next day, I went out and bought a small voice recorder. Over the next few days, I experimented with hiding it in her car before she left for work, testing different spots to see where it could pick up the best audio and how long it could record. At the same time, I looked up the location of their next meetup and scouted the area so I would be ready when the day came. The night before she was supposed to see him, Jessica casually told me she had to travel to a nearby town for work and would be home late. I acted like it was no big deal, told her to take her time, and tried my best to keep my emotions in check so she would not suspect anything. The next day, I waited until around 6 in the evening, then drove out to the spot where I knew they would be. And sure enough, there they were, sitting in her car, wrapped around each other, making out like a couple of teenagers. I did not go up to them. I did not cause a scene. I just drove away, went home, poured myself a few shots, and cried. That night, Jessica came home acting like everything was perfectly normal. I did not say a word about what I had seen. I just made us dinner. She was in an unusually good mood, all bubbly and cheerful, going on about how great her meeting had gone and how much she appreciated me being so understanding about her schedule. After she went to bed, I went out to her car and retrieved the voice recorder. Then I sat down and listened. What I heard made me sick. Not only had she been begging him to go back to their office so they could sleep together, but the way she spoke to him, the desperation in her voice, the sheer excitement, was unlike anything I had ever heard from her before. She sounded almost unhinged, like she could not stand being away from him. And that was when I realized she had never, ever spoken to me that way. After listening to everything on the voice recorder, I went straight to the bedroom, woke Jessica up, and told her we needed to talk. I asked her, point blank, if she was cheating. She denied it immediately. I asked her which bar she had been at that night, and she pretended not to even know the name. That is when I told her that I had been there earlier that day and had seen some things she might want to explain. Her whole demeanor shifted in an instant. Instead of defending herself or denying it further, she went straight to panic mode. Did you follow me? How could you do that? Is there a tracker in my car? You have to tell me if you are tracking me. I am going to have a panic attack. It was absolute insanity. I told her I had read her text from a few weeks ago, and I knew she had met up with her boss, Stephen, that night. She grabbed her phone and opened her messages, acting like she was proving something by showing me there were no such texts. I guess she thought that if the messages were gone, it somehow erased the fact that I had already seen them. Looking back, her logic was ridiculous. Finally, after going back and forth, she admitted it. Yes, she had been seeing Stephen. Yes, it had happened. A few times. And then she hit me with a real kicker. If I made her stop seeing him, she would not love me anymore. And somehow, in my messed up state of mind, that actually worked on me. I had no self-confidence left. I hated the idea of divorce. And honestly, at that point, I convinced myself that being with someone, splitting the bills, keeping up appearances, was better than being alone. So, for the next few months, that was how things went. She would keep seeing him, and I would keep trying to talk her out of it. But the situation only got more absurd. Stephen had other girlfriends, and Jessica knew about them. That did not stop her from getting jealous, though. One night, she came home absolutely sobbing, and I held her as she cried about how she thought Stephen was going to leave her for another woman. I just went completely numb inside. There was no sadness, no anger, just this deep, ironic amusement. I still cannot explain why I stayed after that. And of course, she kept seeing him anyway. At that point, it was not even just Stephen anymore. Jessica had started having one-night stands with random men. Over the years, I found out about a few of them, and I am sure there were plenty more I never even knew about. Eventually, I hit my breaking point. I developed full-blown panic attacks and knew I could not keep living like this. I gave her the voice recorder and told her that if she did not end things with Stephen and record herself doing it, I was done. She cried, but in the end, she agreed. The next day, she made the call. Stephen panicked the moment he found out that I knew, and I got to see it all unfold in real time thanks to Jessica's brand new Apple Watch, which she did not realize still saved deleted texts. After that, things calmed down a little, and we even attempted marriage counseling. Jessica agreed to go, but only on the condition that I would not mention her cheating in the first session. The counselor spent the entire hour telling me I was smothering Jessica by wanting to check her phone and know where she was, something I had only started doing after she had multiple affairs. Needless to say, we never went back. That was 2015 through 2016. After that, we stayed together, and every few months, I would discover another betrayal. One time, she got blackout drunk and performed oral on a coworker in a bar bathroom. Another time, while on a work trip, she started texting some guy and developed the strangest emotional affair I have ever heard of. Half of his messages were about how his grandmother had to wipe his butt until he was a teenager and how much he liked it. At that point, I had completely checked out emotionally. It was like I had built up a tolerance for the pain. Jessica would get caught. We would have the same ritualistic fight. She would swear she would stop, and then a few months later, the cycle would start all over again. It almost became a game for her, figuring out how I had caught her that time, and then changing her habits to avoid getting caught next time. She stopped using her Apple Watch, avoided using her car, and found other ways to cover her tracks. And somehow, in the middle of all this, we were still arguing about how I was not invested enough in the relationship. The final straw came when I got a message out of nowhere from a woman named Natalie, the wife of one of Jessica's coworkers. Natalie had caught her husband and Jessica exchanging texts and Snapchats, and she wanted me to know. She sent me screenshots, and that was when it all became unavoidable. Up until then, I had always found ways to rationalize things, convince myself that Jessica was just prone to making bad decisions, or that these were isolated mistakes. But the text from Natalie made it clear. Jessica was not just careless. She was not just weak. This was who she was. She had been texting this guy things like, "I should have done you the first time I saw you," and setting up meetups. When I confronted her with the messages, her first reaction was annoyance. Not guilt. Not regret. Just frustration that the guy had not hidden it better from his wife. It was like a switch flipped in my head. When I talked with Natalie, I could hear how devastated she was. She had 2 kids with her husband, and their entire family was about to be torn apart. And meanwhile, Jessica was complaining about how this guy could not handle this kind of relationship and had broken some imaginary cheater's code of conduct. That was it. I was done. It was like waking up after 6 years of affairs and 10 years before that of manipulation and emotional chaos. I moved into the finished half of the basement, slept on an air mattress next to my gym equipment, and started drafting up dissolution papers. I figured if the dissolution did not work out, I would just hire a lawyer and go for a full divorce. In the meantime, I completely shut her out. Gray rock, no emotions, no engagement. Jessica tried love bombing me in her own ridiculous way. One time, I came home from work and found that she had bought me a lamp and placed it next to my air mattress in the basement. It was probably the kindest thing she had ever done for me. And then, a few days later, I caught her in one last moment of pure insanity. She was working from home in the afternoon, and did not hear me walk into the kitchen for a drink. I stopped when I heard her on speakerphone with Stephen. Yes, him. Still, I stood there, listening, as Stephen asked her if she was alone. She told him yes. And then, I swear I am not making this up, he started talking about how he had never had sex in an automatic car wash and thought that would be fun. I had to pause and ask myself, where does she even find these people? At that moment, I just walked right into the room, stood behind the couch, and said loudly, "Hey, Stephen! Nice hearing from you!" Jessica practically jumped out of her skin, nearly falling off the couch. Stephen immediately hung up. And me? I just laughed, put on my shoes, and headed for the door. Jessica, still recovering, yelled, "That was rude!" I laughed again, grabbed my coat, and started walking out. She asked where I was going, and I just said, "Out." Something about the way I said it must have made it clear that this was it. Because for the first time, she finally looked like she understood. She ran up and blocked the door, like that was going to stop me. She gave me this weird little smirk, as if we were still playing some kind of game. Like if she physically stood in front of the door, I would just have to stay, and we would magically go back to being married. So, I picked her up, moved her to the side, and gently set her back down. I told her, "If you try to keep me here, I will take you apart. I do not have the patience for you anymore. All the anger I have pushed down for years is still right here." I had never once touched her in anger, and I still never have. But that was the closest I ever got. I left and never looked back. After I walked away, I only saw Jessica a few more times. She signed the dissolution papers with almost no revisions. I made it clear that if she tried to make things difficult, I could let her company know about the affair between her and her boss, which would likely get them both fired. That was enough to get me the house, my car, and less than half of the massive $20,000 credit card debt I had no idea she had racked up. Thankfully, none of my retirement accounts were touched. That alone was a huge win. She came back to Ohio in December 2019 to sign everything, and for some reason, she brought her new boyfriend with her. As expected, the whole thing was painfully awkward. He seemed convinced that I was some kind of abusive ex, and he had come along just in case I got violent. The irony of that was almost funny, considering Jessica had been the one to get physically aggressive in our marriage, while I had only ever restrained her arms to stop her from hitting me. I never bothered telling him she had cheated on me. Honestly, I would not be surprised if he was one of the guys she had been with, so he probably already knew. The only other time I saw her was when she came to get the last of her stuff from the house. A few months had passed, and while she was packing, she mentioned that she had gotten a new apartment. Then she casually dropped that her new boyfriend had moved in without even asking. She only found out when he helped her move in and plopped an urn with his dad's ashes on her table. She gave me this weird, almost pleading look, like she expected me to help her or feel bad for her. I just laughed. That was the last time I saw her. Within a week of the divorce, I was already meeting new people. At a concert, a woman approached me out of nowhere and gave me her number. Then it happened again at a local event. Within a month, I was dating 4 different women, each of them better than Jessica in every possible way. A friend of mine joked that I had that fresh on the market energy. Honestly, I think I was just happy for the first time in years, and people could tell. Eventually, I slowed down on the dating scene, but I did have a few relationships. I threw myself into fitness even harder. Took a trip to Peru, hiked the Cordillera Blanca Mountains, and nearly got stuck there when COVID hit. I also got really into ancestry research after doing a 23andMe test, and ended up discovering this strange little utopian commune that was founded by someone with my last name. It is mostly just historical buildings now, but it was a fascinating find. Over the years, Jessica tried to stay in contact. Sometimes she would reach out for legitimate reasons, but most of the time, it was just her way of trying to keep me in her orbit. I ignored her, but I did hear some funny updates through the grapevine. For instance, her new boyfriend immediately started fake proposing to her multiple times a week, and she was getting freaked out. She texted me once complaining about how much higher taxes are when you are single, and that she was marrying him for tax benefits. When she found out I had gotten engaged, she actually mailed a hand-painted congratulations card to my house, straight to the trash. More recently, I heard that her boyfriend was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Knowing Jessica, I highly doubt she will suddenly develop a nurturing, selfless side to take care of a man 10 years older than her with a serious health condition. Then, in August 2020, I met her. My wife, Claire. She is incredible. She had been through her own nightmare of a marriage, and funny enough, her ex was basically a male version of Jessica. We clicked instantly. One day, I was talking with a friend and said, "I just want to find someone normal." Claire overheard me, and we locked eyes. She had the same exact thought running through her mind. We started dating, and after 2 years, we got married this past September. In all that time, we have never had a real fight. We take care of each other, we talk every single day, and it is always effortless. It is hard to put into words, but she is the one. Life is good now. Looking back, I cannot believe I stayed in that mess for so long, wasting half my life on someone who did not deserve it. And I know there are people reading this who are stuck in the same situation, wondering if they should leave. If that is you, I get it. We all get it. You tolerate things you never thought you would. You tell yourself that this person you have invested so much in cannot be doing this on purpose. You keep making excuses, letting them get away with more and more. But it is not worth it. Cheating does not just happen once. If they justify it to themselves once, they will do it again and again. They will convince themselves that they are not really doing anything wrong, and they will find ways to justify it to you too. Meanwhile, you will spend every second wondering what they are doing when they are not with you. You deserve better. So leave. Walk away. Cut your losses and do whatever you need to do. My fear of divorce and my lack of confidence kept me trapped in a miserable situation for years, and nothing that happened in that time helped me in any way. The only thing that finally got me out of that cycle was me. You are the only one who can put yourself in a better place. Focus on yourself. Surround yourself with the people who actually care about you. It gets better once you leave.